Hello all and welcome to today's webinar on Mastering the Art of Creating Successful Grant Proposals, hosted jointly by Enago and Altum. We have with us Dr. Christina Nixon and Ms. James McKee. We welcome you both. Christina holds a PhD in molecular biology, cellular biology and biochemistry from Brown University and has more than 10 years of experience in teaching and communicating science. She also possesses extensive grant reviewing experience through her position as a grant reviewer at the National Science Foundation. Today, she will share with us best practices for writing an effective grant proposal and will also take us through the overall grant writing and application process. James is the Director of Business Development for Grant Management Solutions at Altum. He has more than 25 years of experience in grant systems and more than 30 years of experience in IT and software solutions. He is passionate towards providing innovative funding solutions to the research community. And following Christina's session, James will introduce Proposal Central, which is a platform for researchers to manage their grant applications. Before we start today's webinar, I would like to give you all a brief introduction about Enago. We are the world's leading author service provider, and our author-first, quality-first approach ensures that our authors receive only the best quality output and excellent user experience at all times. This unrelenting focus on authors' needs means we never compromise on our quality systems and processes at any cost. All our services are designed keeping in mind the author's needs. Enago Academy is our author training platform that educates authors through a number of resources, including webinars like today's webinar, as well as workshops. We also have an e-learning platform for researchers, Enago Learn, and a one-on-one consultation platform called Enago Consult. The Enago promise guarantees that a manuscript edited by us will never be rejected on the basis of poor language. But on a rare occasion, if a rejection occurs, we will take full responsibility of re-editing the paper for resubmission at no additional cost. Enago's comprehensive after-sales services will support you every step of the way until your manuscript is published. They're designed to take care of every need from the time you receive our main service till you are published. Enago Research Communication Service is designed to help you effectively present your research data. So that's about Enago. Now moving on to today's topic, I will now hand over the mic to Christina. Christina, over to you.
All right, so my presentation should be up now for you. And we will begin our discussion on getting a research proposal through the grant submission process. All right. So as you can see on this slide, it's a busy slide with all the different countries in the world and what their expenditures on R&D, research and design are. And as you can see from this graph, the four biggest contributors to research in absolute amounts of money are the US, followed by China, Japan, and Germany. And one of the things that this tells you is that these countries are valuing R&D, and this represents the time, capital, and effort that they're putting into scientific advancements. Innovations for new technologies and effective adaptations of these existing technologies are required for any nation's sustainable growth. But if you don't look at just absolute dollars, what you'll see is that if you look at the percentage that's being of a country's GDP, you'll see that South Korea actually gives 4.3%, followed by Japan, and then Israel are up above 4%. So what is research funding? Okay, so I think this is probably something that we all have the basic concept of, but it refers to money that's allocated for research studies, and these can be in areas of science, technology, social sciences. And they're funded by governments, private corporations, charitable foundations, all sorts of different organizations. So don't limit yourself just to government grants. In developed countries, these funds generally represent about 2 to 3% of their GDP, though we just saw that Korea, Japan, and Israel are up at 4%. While government granting organizations usually fund basic science and innovative projects, charity organizations and industry tend to fund more projects that have more of a potential for commercialization. And privately funded research is almost always profit-oriented. You can find funding for various subject areas, though life sciences gained the largest share of this funding in 2016, being well over 50%, followed by engineering, which is down at 16%. But other fields, there's also other fields that computer science, geoscience, mathematical science, physical sciences, together all receive 20% of the funding. You can find non-science and engineering areas like education, business, and humanities, but those are quite a bit less. However, you can see that R&D is really important for economic growth of a country. And in fact, some studies have suggested that there is a positive correlation between how much is invested in R&D and that country's economic growth. Okay, so what are good grant writing skills and why are they essential? Well, despite the fact that I just showed you all these very big numbers saying that governments are pouring money into research, it's actually shrinking. So you have less pots of money to go around, which then corresponds to intense competition to acquire this funding. Because of this intense competition, earning this external funding inevitably helps boost your career. And with this financial independence, you actually get some intellectual independence because you now have funding that's coming in to support your particular idea in the study that you would like to advance. But it's also essential in your grant writing skills to understand what the decision makers, what these grant reviewers and the organizations are ultimately looking for and how they're going to evaluate your proposal. Because if you send in a perfect proposal in your opinion and it doesn't fit the institution, it's not going to be funded. Acquiring the funds can help you build your credibility and your visibility as nationally, internationally, within your own organization. All right, so the types of research funding. Grants are not loans. They are non-repayable money that's awarded to finance your research activities, your proposal. One caveat here is that depending on what the requirements are from that grant, if you didn't meet some of their publication requirements or reporting requirements, they could ask for that money to be returned. So you do need to be careful there. The money can be awarded in installments or all at once. This is one way that a granting organization can protect itself if you're not meeting their requirements by giving it to you incrementally. It's also important to understand the goals of the funding body, as we've mentioned before, and their grant program. And know that their decision of whether your grant is going to be funded or not is not only based on how well your proposal is written and how well what kind of researcher you are, but it's also largely based on how well your proposal fits what their goals are. And don't forget about other types of grants, because research is not only just funded, but you can also find grants for training, travel to conferences, as well as skill building grants. You can kind of dump the different types of grants into 4 larger buckets. So you have competitive funding, formula funding, continuation funding, and pass-through funding. Competitive funding is probably what you think of most often, where the proposals are selected based on the evaluation of the proposal and the researcher by a reviewer or a team of reviewers. And this funding is based on the merits of the application and, as we've said, how well it fits with the organization's goal. The recipients are not predetermined, so it's an open call application. Formula funding are grants that are given to more predetermined recipients. So you've met an eligibility criteria for the application process before your grant is even reviewed. Continuation funding is generally an award that's opened up to a recipient who already has a grant. And so now you've been asked to apply for additional funding that furthers your project or would fund a spin-off project. And while some of these programs restrict the applications to existing grantees, others will allow continuation funding of an idea to be brought in by other applicants. It's always a good idea to try to collaborate with someone who already has current funding from that organization. It will increase your chances. Pass-through funding is funds that are given by the federal government or a larger organization to a secondary organization like a state or a local government or a university. And then those organizations can distribute the grant money that way. You can think of it as like an NIH training grant that would come to a university, and they're given multiple training awards then that can be given to the students who attend there or the researchers that attend there. And the application process goes through that university and not the larger organization. Research grants are awarded to fund a research project for a predefined purpose, unless those grants that we were talking about are like travel grants or training grants, but there's still a predefined purpose. They can fund an individual or an entire team of researchers. So you have to be careful about what the proposal is asking for. Make sure that your research team fits their guidelines. The principal investigator is generally a senior member of the team or the academic staff, and then there are co-investigators and research assistants. Sometimes those persons are named, sometimes they aren't. The principal investigator can be a trainee if it's a certain type of grant, but generally they have a mentor who is a senior member on their team. Research grants can also fund large collaborative projects between researchers, institutions, and even countries. So those are actually a good way to form a network with your collaborators. They're also available for early stage researchers to establish their academic career. Those sometimes come with restrictions, but we'll talk about that a little later. A research grant applicant always requires a host organization to support your application, and you have to provide, you have to show that that organization is going to provide you with the resources to carry out your research and show that they're supporting you beyond this grant. So research fellowships were something that I alluded to when a junior member might be the principal investigator on a grant. So these are financial aid awards to an individual researcher based on the academic merit. They fund tuition, fees, living expenses. They can give a full salary, a part salary. Sometimes they help with healthcare payments. Sometimes they also include a small bit of seed money to actually help with supplies for the research. Sometimes they expect for your university or host organization to be helping you with that part. The funding is often good for 1 or more years. They can go up to 5. Fellowships might restrict applicants based on the time gap between the start of the fellowship and the completion of your degree. So once you have finished your PhD, this is sort of your sweet spot. You need to really kind of be looking into what fellowships are available to you and what sort of restrictions they have on your completion deadline. Some of these are very short, like 2 years, 3 years. I have seen ones that go out to 10 years, but those are very few and far between. Some fellowships also fund engagement with industry and public bodies. So as a researcher at an academic institution, you might form a collaboration with a pharmaceutical company or someone in the biotech industry, and they may fund you to do a piece of their project in your lab that they can't. So some of the other research grants that we kind of talked about briefly or were alluded to are these international fellowships, and they foster a bi-directional flow. So you can think of this as an exchange program between 2 countries so that you can trade knowledge and experience with those different institutions. There are also travel grants that will help you with your travel, your accommodations, sometimes your registration at conferences and symposiums. There are also institutional research grants. These are a good pot of money to look for in that they come from your host academic institution, and they often fund junior investigators. Sometimes they will fund they call resubmission awards. So if you've submitted a grant already and you have a score and there's some critiques that you need to address, these types of pots of money are good for those things. The other reason that institutional research grants are very helpful is because your competition is going to be less there. There are also seminar grants where you can attend national or international symposiums and covering the registration fees. So one new exciting thing from Enago is that they're going to be offering a researcher grant. And these types of grants are going to be a general research fund, a medical research fund, and a young researchers fund. They're going to focus on China, Korea, and Japan with differing amounts of awards there listed for those 3 areas. There's also going to be a special funding track for female researchers to help improve their chances. Those application deadlines are next spring, so March 31st, 2020, and they will be reviewed then through April and May, with funding awards being announced in mid-June. So it's something definitely to look out for, and if you have any inquiries about that, you can reach out to the email address at the bottom there at academy@enago.com, and the website and RFA are on their way. So there are different types of research funding organizations. Okay, and so it's extremely important to identify who the funders are operating in your particular area of research. So you can think of in bigger buckets, there are organizations who are funding research in overall topics like biology or psychology, and then you want to narrow it down because they're going to be organizations and grant funders who are looking for more specific subfields within those larger subject areas. These funders can be government, charities, NGOs, and industry, as we've mentioned before. So don't leave out any of those areas when you're searching for grants. And your research can be funded with the intention of academic and scientific progress, or for a positive commercial outcome. So really think about what type of research you're attempting to do, and make sure that their goals are aligning with you. All funders have priorities, an institutional structure, and ways of communicating their requirements. So do your homework. Make sure you know what those requirements are. Okay. Generally, in government grant funding institutions, their decisions are complying with their government policies and benefit the society. So depending on the type of research that you're doing, you want to be aware that make sure that it aligns with legal precedents set by your government and policy in that country. Your research proposals are usually chosen for funding by an agency within the government. So it's not the head of the government, but an agency within them. The government funding opportunities and projects generally are affected, as we just discussed, by shifts in government policy. So you want to keep on top of what current events and current news are happening, how that would affect your research. Research proposals add value to general public, are ranked higher for government funding. So basic science, unfortunately, if you don't put the right spin on it and convince them that your basic science is going to add value to the general population, you're going to have less of a chance. It's not impossible, and you should look for funding that targets those basic science. There are separate funding opportunities for innovative and marketable projects, just as there are some for basic science as well. So charities and NGOs are funded by an individual, a family, a community, or a corporate entity. Okay, so these are non-government organizations that have set up for a purpose. They can be funded by a government agency, but they're not linked to them. Most charities support a specific cause, like the Wellcome Trust is associated with medical causes. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is associated with all sorts of different health, global health affairs. Funding decisions from these charities are based primarily on how well your research proposal integrates with what they are supporting, what they're interested in. So it's extremely important to understand what their mission is. Industry is a major contributor to research funding in academia. Okay, they want to use your resources and your knowledge, your expertise to help prove their products that they want to bring to market. So these are good collaborations to join into. Much of the industry funding is directed towards applied research rather than basic science, because again, they're more profit driven. The majority of industry research, while it's often performed in their own institutions, in their own companies, they do, as we said, collaborate with academic centers. So these are the collaborations that you want to try to build. These partnerships can differ in their motivations. They might be testing previously developed products. Maybe they want to try it in a new animal model. Maybe they're looking for how it works in a basic science setting so that they can then bring that to a commercial place later on. Right. So planning your research proposal. This is probably where you need to spend the most time. Everybody tries to spend the most time on writing their proposal, but planning for your funding opportunity is as important, if not more important, as the actual proposal itself. So make sure you know what type of call it is. Is this an open call, a directed call, or is it an invitation specific? So if you put a lot of work into sending a proposal out that doesn't fit one of these calls, you've wasted your time and their time, because it's not going to even make it to the reviewer, the organizers, the granting organization is going to pull it. So let's look at one example, the Leverhulme Trust, which is a large grant-making foundation in the UK, and we'll consider why they might be wanting to put a call out. So they're not nearly as interested in examining your previous background, interestingly enough. They have really few restrictions on what the subject matter is, except that it be medicine-based research and advocacy groups. They don't mind if you're interested in other types of studies. They generally just require that you have a novel idea, a PhD, and a host university in the UK. So what do they want? The trust wants creative thinking and for it to be interdisciplinary. They want to see that you're working not just inside your subject, but that you're collaborating and you're looking at things from a different perspective and perhaps using other disciplines to pull those things in. They want something new and exciting, and they want your best ideas. They want something really innovative. The only deliverable that they mention is a significant piece of publishable work. So here is your requirement to publish. So why do they want it? They intend to be a foundational funder for UK university systems. They want to really boost the research there in that system. And they want you to identify a host UK institution where the project will be conducted. And they want, just like many other charities do, and in other countries, they don't often fund international research. There are some that fund international research, but generally a organization within a country is looking to fund things that are going to benefit their nation. So what about the how? They don't mind how you conduct your research. They just want you to have a successful project. They want it to be sound methodology and evaluated by an academic reviewer. So as I said, before you apply, you really have to plan ahead. You need to finalize your grant fellowship that you're going to apply for. So you've done your research, you've figured out which grant is going to fit you or which grants are going to fit you. It's never a bad plan to apply to more than one place. Check if you need to apply for any ethical approvals. A lot of times, particular organizations will want to see your to see that nation's approval for animal work or human clinical studies. They want to see that you have the proper things in place. And you also need to check that your host institution, your academic university, is willing to support your application to that organization. And you also need to finalize the co-investigators and your collaborators for your study. Who's going to be involved in the study so that you can start pulling together what their expertise are. And then somewhere around 6 months ahead, you want to download the application form. Sometimes this isn't always possible. Some organizations don't post 6 months ahead, but hopefully they have, so that you can get an idea of what's required. If they don't have the current call out for that year and you see that they do one every year, you can look at a previous call to kind of get an idea of what they might be expecting, and then be sure to grab the new one as soon as it comes out to see if there's any changes. You want to arrange for a planning meeting with your administrators at your institution, because a lot of times those grant administrators are going to have tons of experience. They may have even submitted a grant to the organization that you're looking at already, and they can give you a lot of advice and help you on certain parts of it so you don't have to do the whole thing yourself. And you want to finalize what preliminary data you're going to need to have prior to this application, and you're going to need that 6 months perhaps to get those taken care of. So 3 months ahead, you want to be obtaining quotes for any planned capital equipment purchases if these are allowed by the grant application, and you're going to check costing needs and get them approved by your organization and get quotes for things that you want to buy, so you can show proof of what your budget's going to look like. And if you hadn't already, you want to start drafting your application so that at 3 months ahead, you have time to send it for internal peer review to colleagues. You want to choose some colleagues who are inside your field, as well as colleagues who are part of your larger department or your division, but maybe not experts in your field, because your reviewers aren't always going to be experts in your subfield. So an expert in your larger division needs to be able to understand and follow what you're doing in your application. Make sure at this point you understand what the funder's mandates on publishing are. These might impact how your career progresses, so you want to make sure that if the funder mandates publishing manuscripts in open access journals or depositing them in free access repositories to increase their impact and visibility, does that align with your research goals? Some industries grants are going to tell you that you can't publish your research at all without prior consent. They're going to make sure that the best messaging for their product is going out. Again, you need to make sure that this sort of mandate aligns with your research goals. So, and it's also essential to check their publishing policies and guidelines prior to publishing the grant. They may have strict guidelines on whether you can present this research at conferences, if you can present it as a poster or presentation, how you can disseminate your research. Here's a good checklist to go through for preparing for your grant. So you want to consider the long-term goals of your academic institution as well as the funding organization, and make sure they align. So really start with the end in mind, your top-down approach. What are their goals? What are your goals? What's the goal of your research, and how can you express to them that it aligns with their goals? You want to identify your strengths, particularly your strengths in context with their goals. You want to make sure that you have a comprehensive plan, not just a proposal for what you wish to achieve, but an overall plan for your research. The research, make sure you know which prospective funding bodies you've identified, if you've identified more than one, hopefully. And target a funding source that has interest in your organization and your program. When you talk to your colleagues and at different conferences, as well as inside your own institution, you'll start to find out that there are charitable organizations that really like to fund your type of work. Those are ones you should go after. Gather information on the details of the grants that are available. How do you apply for them? And can you find out about any of the members on their committees? Do you know any of them from conferences that you've met? If it's a government organization, you might have a program officer. Meet them. Make sure that you connect with them at conferences so that you can talk about what their funding goals are for their in the upcoming year. Make sure that you seek answers to these questions. What are the current trends? What has that organization been funding in the past? You can, some organizations will post this on their website. You can ask, fellow colleagues about what types of grants have they submitted, which ones got funded, which ones didn't, to get an idea of what types of things they're interested in and what things they're not interested in. What are the limitations and restrictions, and how do those affect you and your research idea? What subject areas were awarded the funding most recently? Does the funder have any future plans? Have they put any directionality that they are tending to go to? Does your research align with these future plans? Who are the decision makers and the assessors? While many of the reviewers can't tell you what grants that they review for or what sections because those are confidential, you might know somebody who is part of the larger organization and they may be able to guide you to a good resource. What review process do they follow? Again, a lot of times for some organizations, this is a confidential process and you may not find out very specific details, but you might get an overall sort of guide of how they do their process. Is it reviewed by a team? Is it reviewed by one or two reviewers? Are they outside reviewers? Are they colleagues? Are they experts in the field? Are they panel from that charity that may not know anything about your particular field of interest? What is the deadline for submission? This is extremely important because if you submit your grant late, they're not going to look at it. How long is the process going to take? So think about it in regards to your career goals and what's happening with your research projects. So if it's going to be a year before they're going to tell you about funding, how does that affect what you're trying to do? Is that the right grant for you at this particular moment? What is the proper way to approach them? Is there a contact that you need to go through? And how many people apply for a grant from that particular organization and what percentage of those grants are awarded? Okay. So some things to remember. Funding bodies are looking for someone who's a good researcher. They want to see that you either have a track record of producing quality science, quality research, or they want to see that you have the potential as a young investigator to be a good independent researcher. You should really think about an organization, a grant funding organization, as an investor in you and your idea, and your proposal as your pitch to them as to why they should fund your proposal. You need to convince them. You must sell your idea. You have to be enthusiastic about your work, particularly in the writing of that grant. If you're not enthusiastic about your work and your excitement doesn't come through in the grant, the reviewer is going to be bored and not think that your grant is that interesting either. Always consider the funder's point of view. Consult your finance office on matters such as staff costs and overhead so that your budget is accurate. If your proposal is great and your budget is not in line with your proposal, then there's going to be a big disconnect for the reviewer and they're going to flag this as a potential problem. Seek advice on confidentiality, your publication restrictions, and liabilities between you and this potential funder so that you know how that's going to impact your career in the future. Okay, so the meat, how to write a research proposal. So this is what everyone wants to focus on generally, is how to write a proposal, but I want to remind you that the planning portion that we just discussed is just as important as this portion. So your research proposal generally will have aims and objectives, and then your research question that's going to be addressed, your strategy and your methods of how you're going to do that. Your aims should be strong and to the point. They should be larger than the proposal, but linked to your objectives. So what is the overall goal? Your objectives really should highlight what the study is set out to accomplish. And generally, this is one or two sentences in an application, but you should always consult the guidelines for the proposal for the institution that you're applying to. And where you're discussing your research questions and the strategy by which you're going to answer them, this section is going to show how you're going to investigate and what are the actual methods of the research and how this is going to get you to your objective and your aims. You're also going to highlight the specific methodology. You really want to get into the details here, depending on the space you have and the type of organization, again, that you're applying to. The other thing you want to make sure that you put in this section is potential problems that you're going to run into. Always give a solution for your problems. So make sure that the reviewers reading your grant see that you've identified where there might be an issue in your methodology, but that you've already come up with 1 to 2 solutions or backup plans for those potential problems. This will show the reviewer that you are you're goal-oriented, you're a clear thinker, and you have backup plans. So if you do come across other problems that you haven't identified in your research strategy section, they will feel confident that you will be able to handle those. The preliminary data portion of any research proposal. This section is always probably the trickiest because you want to have strong pilot data to demonstrate that what you can do is possible and that it's promising. So sometimes this isn't always possible because you don't have the money to do this particular research. You do want to try to show either in a previous published work that you did something similar, or that you've tested out the tools that you're going to need for this work. But having the stronger the pilot data you have, the more convincing that your proposal is doable it's going to be to the reviewer. And as we've stated, there's no way to know how much preliminary research is adequate. Sometimes the only way you're going to find out is if you submit your grant and are given back a review. And then you can read those reviews and those critiques, and they may say you need more in this particular area. Another way to find out ahead of time is those internal colleague reviews, and they'll be able to help you. An outside opinion will help you identify places that reviewers might see a hole. The reviewer may need more preliminary data for things that are considered a little bit more risky or ambitious to convince them of its potential success. So something that's innovative and never been tried before. You really need to show as many of the building blocks up to that particular experiment that you want to do to show that it's possible. Researchers working on a collaborative project or a multidisciplinary project, should include preliminary or pilot data from all of the relevant pieces so that the reviewers can see that you've thought about how the entire puzzle will go together. So the methodology. Your methodology section should really highlight what you intend to do and in what order you intend to do it. You want to make sure that you identify what are the key findings of the study. And this is a great place to highlight any potential problems you could potentially run into, as well as how you might fix those issues. It should be written separately for each project aim so that the various stakeholders, your collaborators, can contribute to them, and in the end it's compiled by your whole team lead. But if it's written in this way separately by each project goal, it's also easier for the reviewer to follow. You want to keep everything in context. It's important to make sure that your project proposal is set in the background of the research question. You have to make sure that your reviewer understands why it's important. The research goal should really align well with the funder's objectives, as I've stated multiple times now in this. Okay, so project planning is another portion of your proposal that is really important and often doesn't get as much time as the research strategy portion does. It should really clarify the roles, it should give you a good project plan so that you know what the project monitoring, how it's going to be evaluated, and how you're going to identify any issues. It should clarify whose roles are what and what those responsibilities are. It's actually a really good idea now. A lot of proposals are starting to put in a section as well that shows if there are conflicts between the various collaborators, how those will be decided. If you have if there's going to be any sort of disagreement about a methodology or not, who is the deciding person in a large, particularly a large collaborative study. The timeline set should really be realistic, and you should represent the entire duration of the project. So whatever the funding time is for the money, as well as realistically, how long is this going to take you? Because that's a key piece that's going to be evaluated by the reviewer. If you're proposing unrealistic timeframes, they're not going to believe that you can accomplish what you can accomplish, or that any of the rest of your proposal is true, because you've given these timelines that seem a little out of place. A great way to show your timeline is through a Gantt chart. So you can show that this is the planning, like for example, the one on the bottom shows the planning and designing is going to take you 1 to 4 months, data collection 5 to 10 months, then your data analysis through months through 8 through 13, and then the publication process or your dissemination is going to be months 14 through 18. For this, this is showing a 1.5 years duration. You can do subcharts of this as well if there are other details that you can provide about what's going to be in those data collections and how those data, perhaps maybe the data collection can be broken up, that months 5 and 6 are going to be one particular portion, 7 and 8 another, and so on. Okay, so again, the budget has to fit what you have proposed to do. You have to really reach out for your institution to their support for coming up with this budget. They've done these many times in most cases, and they can help you put together a budget that's going to align with the goals of that organization. You have to divide the expenses into sections so that it can be properly evaluated. You want to show how much money you're going to be spending on your personnel, what your direct project expenses are going to be, supplies, equipment, services that you need to secure, as well as any administrative or overhead expenses. And always remember that some of these aren't going to be covered by the particular grant that you're applying for, depending on what their restrictions are. But you may need to show that you recognize that these are going to be expenses associated with your project, what those expenses are, and you may need to outline where that money is coming from if the grant doesn't supply money for those services, to again show that your project is accomplishable. So there's 2 other parts that often come, not always, but can be included in the grant proposal, and that is your resume or your CV. You really want to make sure that you just as people say for a job search, you want to make sure that your CV or resume is targeted for what you're applying for, because you're also being evaluated, not only your project. You want to show that you have project management skills, that you have the research experience, and that you have some sort of budgeting experience, particularly if this is a very large grant. $1 million is a lot of money, so they want to make sure that you can manage that kind of money. And maybe you don't have that expertise, and you would highlight the fact that your university does have that support for you. You want to make sure that your publication record is in your CV or your resume, and try to find a way to highlight the publications that are relevant to the grant that you're applying for. So in this instance, the NIH BioSketch, for instance, only allows you to put a certain number of publications in at this point, and you really want to make sure that those publications are the best ones to highlight how you are the right person for this project. The cover letter, just like for manuscripts, it really should explain the significance of the submitted project. Cover letters aren't always allowed for all grant application types, but they are for many. This is your opportunity to really express in layman terms what the significance of the project is and how it's in line with the scope of their goals, their funding scheme. It's just another opportunity for you to prove that you're a good match. Okay, so the peer review process. So you've done all your work, you've spent a year or more on this application, you've submitted it to the funding agency. So it's now going to go through a technical and administrative check for eligibility. And unfortunately, this is where a lot of grants get pulled because they haven't done their homework and they don't meet the right requirements or the eligibility. So be sure that you don't waste your time applying for a grant that you're not eligible for. Your time is valuable, and you want to make sure that you're using it for grants that you're going to make it through this second step here. The grant proposal will then undergo the peer review process, which is different for different organizations. They tend to follow a pretty similar scheme. And often the report is sent to the applicants, but not always. In my opinion, I think that funding organizations should supply you with feedback. It makes your effort valuable, whether you get the grant or not, if you get feedback, because your proposal will be better when you resubmit it. Be careful about organizations that aren't going to give you feedback on your grant, and really consider if it's worth your time. The applicants can then improve their proposal and respond to the reviewer's comments from the review report if you didn't get accepted on the first round, which is unlikely. Most grants aren't funded on the first round. The grant committee can then take the final decision for the approval or reject the grant application at a resubmission process. Sometimes this resubmission process is the next grant round. Sometimes it's an earlier deadline. Some organizations will have a shortened time to resubmission so that you aren't waiting the whole year or whatever their next deadline is. And then finally, the applicants will receive their notice of the funding agency's decision. So one thing to consider when you're getting your peer review and your critiques back, these are valuable and they should help you. It's often hard to not take them as a personal criticism of you. Take a step back and make sure that you're looking at this objectively. You want to make sure that when you're responding to them, that you strike a balance between constructive ideas and criticism and standing up for what your goals are. Always try to give in to the reviewer when you can, but don't compromise your research. So consider these three types of criticism. You have aggressive criticism, constructive criticism, and some faint praise. Aggressive criticism doesn't happen very often. Okay, so it's quite uncommon. Most reviewers are not going to personally attack you. They want to help you succeed as well. If it does happen, however, take a step back, remain calm, try to figure out what the reviewer is really saying. Okay, take the personal out of it, and go back and review your application to make sure that the flaws that they're being aggressive about don't really exist, or so you have a better handle on how to clarify what you meant in an appropriate manner. In some cases, if the criticism is truly aggressive, you can reach out to a program officer and highlight the fact that you believe that that was an unfair and criticism or an unfair review, and ask for another opinion. Constructive criticism is the most helpful and should be everybody's favorite. Don't ever take this form of criticism as personal, because it's really meant to help. It's critical feedback to make your proposal the best it can possibly be. The review process really should be, the whole application and review process is all about having the best research studies come forward in the end. But it is key to only make the changes that fit with your original vision for your research. Okay, so you don't want to compromise your idea, but you do want to take in as many things as you possibly can, particularly if there are multiple reviewers that you've received comments from. Look and see where they align. What are the things they all said to you? Even if those don't align with your original vision, give them some serious consideration. Maybe it's a good idea. If the feedback ends with having to start over again and redesign the entire research, again, if this is brought up by multiple reviewers, it's a good thing to consider. Faint praise is kind of difficult to spot. So especially if you are working in another language that's not your first language. So suggestions to reframe your contribution, or the reviewer has really given you kind of a backhanded compliment. when your seniority is questioned as well for an interdisciplinary project, when you're responding to the criticism, go back and look at your resume or your CV that you submitted. Did you highlight the right sorts of things to show that you are the best person for this particular project? If their criticism is valid, that maybe you don't have the skills that they were hoping for this particular research project, consider bringing somebody else on, another collaborator who could strengthen that part of your project, or get a letter from a mentor who intends to support you through the training process of that particular area. So these are the things to consider when you're talking about the major criteria for acceptance. What are the objectives of your project? And what's the outcome really going to be? So do the objectives align with the funding organization? Are they realistic? And is the outcome that the applicant has stated really what the reviewer believes will happen? Does the proposal address a well-formulated problem? Is this an issue that needs to be addressed? Is it really a research problem or just an application of a known technique? Most granting organizations really want their funding to go to innovative projects. So getting funding for routine application of known techniques is not easy to do. Often, if that is something that is valuable to you and a valuable way to advance your research program, you can work in that routine application as part of an aim, maybe as a sub-aim, and have another more innovative technique that's going to round out that aim. You also want to make sure that your problem is important, is considered to be important, and that you have shown that it's important, and whose solution will have useful effects, that it's going to benefit someone in society, and make sure that that comes through in your grant application. Is the funding necessary for this? Is there funding elsewhere available that, this perhaps a charity organization that you've applied to, you don't want to be, they call it double dipping. You don't want to they don't want to fund something that already has sufficient money being given to that particular area. So you want to make sure that it's a need. Do you have a good idea to base your work on? Is it explained clearly? So remember, reviewers are reading, anywhere from 20 to 100 applications at a time. We don't have time to figure out what you're trying to say. Make sure it's explained clearly so that our job is easier, because often a reviewer is a volunteer who isn't being paid to review your work. They're giving you their time, so make their job easy. Is the evidence that you've given about relevant work that others have done? Have you included all of the background evidence that someone would need to understand to review your proposal? Do the proposers have a good track record, doing good research, good ethical research, and you've been publishing it, so you show that you're a productive researcher? Or if you're a new investigator, have you demonstrated potential? And then what are the implications for policy and practice, and how will these be addressed? Okay. So generally, things that are considered secondary for acceptance are whether you have existing funding. Often somebody who already has existing funding is going to be favored for more funding because it shows that you have a good track record, and that another organization found your ideas worthy enough for funding. Also, your priority might be given to new researchers in the field, depending on the grant application. So highlighting the fact that you are an up-and-coming researcher, a young investigator, might be to your benefit. Again, this would require you to make sure that you know what the requirements are of that grant application. Funders usually want to prefer a reasonable balance of support for different research areas. So they want to make sure that they are funding equal disciplines. So sometimes your proposal is going to be really good, but they needed to fund a social science proposal over your basic science proposal. So don't always take those as negatives, just keep trying. Evidence of industrial interest is sometimes considered as a criteria for acceptance, so the potential future products or ideas. Okay, so these are the common shortfalls that you really need to avoid. Okay. Your proposal is poorly written, badly presented, or it's incomprehensible. Again, reviewers are often volunteers. Don't make their job any harder than it already is. They're giving the time to give you these critiques and to try to help you make a better proposal. The applicant seems to be attempting too much. You've been overambitious. So you really need to strike a balance between your proposing enough to fit the timeline, to be an aggressive proposal, but not overly ambitious so that you have no chance of accomplishing what you set out to with the money and the time that will be allotted. So again, the proposal could be too expensive. If others have tried what you're trying and have failed, and you haven't provided evidence of how you're going to succeed, your proposal won't be funded. If you're claiming that you have this new idea, but you're not providing sufficient technical details for the reviewer to assess your new idea, they're not going to fund it. And if you seem unaware of related research, make sure you've done your homework. You know what's happening in your field, because if you're missing a big key portion of research, particularly if it's that reviewer's area of expertise, that's not going to go well for you in the review process. The proposed research has already been done. Another one that you need to make sure you know what is happening in your field. If your questions are ill-formed or they're just not worthy of it being addressed, I personally don't think that there are scientific questions out there not worthy of being addressed, but that the applicant has not done a good enough job of convincing me as a reviewer that it is worthy of being addressed. And again, we've talked about this one, that is just a routine application of a known technique. So if that is something that's important to your application, try to fit it in with as a sub-aim of a more innovative approach. Okay, so you will be rejected numerous times in your career. You have to develop a thick skin and learn to deal with this rejection. 25% of grants being accepted is considered a good success rate in applying for funding. That's your personal success rate. The success rate of some grants are only 10%. They fund 10% or 5%. There are grants that fund 50% of the applications that come to them. Don't feel discouraged if you're rejected. Consider that as the step to getting to succeed. You have to submit many, many proposals before you will get your first grant. You want to use that criticism that you get back to make you climb up that ladder so that your proposal is better. See it as part of the process of making your proposal the best it can be. Keep trying. Use the reviewer comments. And you may just need a little luck, that you want to get the right reviewers who see what you see in your proposal, and going through those review processes and answering those critiques are going to help you have that luck because you've practiced and you've addressed their criticism. Okay, so once you've finally made it through the arduous process of getting your grant and you've gotten your award, what now? Some grants provide the funding all at once, as we discussed. Some are going to give it to you only in installments. You want to know this ahead of time. Make sure that you have planned appropriately and that what you've planned isn't going to require a whole bunch of money right in the beginning and then smaller amounts of money towards the end of your project if you're getting them in equal installments over. It'll make it difficult to do your project. Likely there are going to be annual review reports that need to be submitted to renew your grant on a yearly basis, particularly if it's a multi-year grant. Be prepared to submit these. These need to be just as good. You need to show that you're getting the work done so that you can get the next installment of the money. Some grants you can only also allow you to apply for additional funding or training projects. Be prepared for this. Be ready for the fact that in 6 months or a year, you're going to be able to apply for this additional money because you've been awarded this grant. Some grants, particularly those that have you that are from charities, are going to ask that you be part of outreach events. They might be physically that you attend an event, or they could be that they want you to write things for their websites, updates for your research. Okay, so at this time, I'm going to hand over the mic to Jamie.
Thank you, Christina. It was an excellent presentation. I really appreciate you doing that. And thanks everybody for attending this session. And I want to just take a minute here and talk a little bit about how the grant platform used by funders is a tool that you can use to improve your application. So almost every funder these days is using an electronic grant system for the application process. We've been operating Proposal Central for 20 years. Most of the funders that we support are in research. Predominant portion of them are in health and biomedical areas, but they also support a lot of other innovative areas. We've done about 550,000 applications through Proposal Central and over 1 million peer review critiques. So we've learned a little bit from that, and some of the things that Christina did, I'll emphasize as we go through here. How do you use the funder's platform to help you with the application process? So the first thing is knowing that there's funding out there. How do you do that? So in Proposal Central, if you go to proposalcentral.com, you'll find that we publish all of the open funding opportunities here. We have a subscription email newsletter that will alert you anytime a new funding opportunity is put up here to apply for. And two things that you can find here on the main site without even registering. One, by looking at each of these funding opportunities, you can find out what their eligibility requirements are. So Christina emphasized looking at that, make sure you're eligible. So you don't want to go through all this work and not meet their program guidelines. The second thing is they'll publish what they're looking for. So every request for applications that they'll put up here will have very specific guidelines about what they're looking for. So you can target the research work that you're doing to those guidelines. So they'll be very clear about what their objectives are. So come here early to the site, see what's being advertised, see if that fits your research. So we have over 100 funders in here. We probably run 20,000 applications through a year, something like 350 different requests for applications will be posted on Proposal Central during any 1 year. The other thing is that on Proposal Central, you have this profile that you can do ahead of the application. So this will save you some time if you do this up front. We've also integrated with ORCID. And ORCID you might consider as a dynamic online resume. So if you fill this out, put your publications on there, you put any grants that you've gotten beforehand, you can sync all of that data up with Proposal Central. That will save you a lot of steps. And a lot of the funders that we work with during the application process will ask about your publications or other awards that you have and what that overlap is. So you can use the data that's in your ORCID record to do that. When we're done, if you get an award here, which would be great, right? So if you get an award from Proposal Central, the funders will push that data to your ORCID profile so you don't have to keep that up. And what we're finding is there's over 7 million researchers that have ORCID profiles. The publishers will update your publications automatically to your profile. Your institution probably uses this for researcher profiles. So ORCID's something that you can use. And if you have an ORCID profile, you can also use those login credentials so that you don't have to remember your Proposal Central password. You can just use your ORCID record to do that. And so there's been a lot of adoption on Proposal Central. 32 of our funders require this ORCID record. NIH, if you're in the health and biomedical field, requires this. The Department of Energy is requiring an ORCID profile. So good to set this up ahead of time. It probably takes 30 seconds to register to get an ORCID record. They also have some really cool tools on there that will allow you to update all of your publications and any other awards into your ORCID profile. And then a lot of places like Proposal Central will reuse that data in the application process. And last year, 50% of the applicants that went through Proposal Central had an ORCID record as they went through the application process. Proposal Central had a really simple and consistent application process. This is online. On the left, you'll see here's all the sections that you go through. One of the key tools, as you go down to the very bottom, this validation step, you can use at any point during the application process to see if you've provided all of the information that they need for a complete and compliant application. So we provide some guidance in here to help you check to see if your application is complete and is meeting the overall requirements of the application process. And it will also have up here, usually in the template section, all the guidelines and documents for the funder for this particular application. So make sure to read these and understand what their requirements are. The other thing is almost every one of our funders in Proposal Central turns around the feedback from the review process. So this is a learning event. If you didn't get funded, this is a chance to read the reviewer's information, use that to improve your applications. I find this a really important tool. Most of our funders consider that an important part of their application process, and peer review is to give you that kind of feedback to make your proposals better, whether you resubmit to them or you go to other funders. This is a good learning experience to figure out how to improve your proposals. And I've written a lot of proposals in my lifetime and found that feedback, although I don't like not getting funded, it helped me win the next proposal. So use it to improve. So the other thing is, once you get the funding, or even if you don't get the funding, if you keep your information current in something like ORCID, funders are using this to try and get more funding, which they can give to you, right? So some of keeping your content current in your ORCID record will help them, because they're using that data to go back to the funder. So they look at the grants that they gave to a researcher, how much publication work, how many other grants did you get. So if you keep that data up in your ORCID record, they're using that to see how individual researchers did that, and then they're looking at an overall program and seeing how productive were the researchers in getting other grants and what kind of publication outputs did they generate, what kinds of patents did they generate, that kind of thing. And then we also use this to make connections between all the data, between publications and awards, and how did this research develop new and novel ideas, and what was our researchers that we funded, how did they impact new therapies or ideas that were developed over time. And so that information that you provide through ORCID or through the progress reports that you submit are essential to them getting more funding. So that's all I have. So use the platform, come early to Proposal Central, get everything set up. And again, thank you to Enago for putting this on, and Christina for your presentation.